or Blockchain Navigators. Mihi ana kia koutou katoa, e ngā kai mā takitaki, e ngā kai hakarongo. Mihi ana kia koe, te tuahine e Kaye-Maree, nau mai, tau mai ki tēnei huihuinga o tāua, ki tēnei I pāho I a tāua e ruku hōhunu ana ki tēnei kaupapa. So really want to welcome you, tuahine Kaye-Maree, to the Blockchain Navigators podcast. It's been a while in the running. But stoked as to have you here. And just a big mihi to all our listeners, all our other blockchain navigators around the motu. Welcome to tonight's episode. I'm going to be having a yarn with Kaye-Maree. So Kaye-Maree's bio would be quite extensive. She's a digital native. She's been rolling in the blockchain space for a long time. She's rolling with all the big guns in the space and doing a whole lot of really, really cool things that we are going to dive into over the course of this podcast. But I thought best to just start with you, tuahine. Ko wai koe, no hea koe, and then how did you what was your sort of journey moving into this blockchain space? And that'll set a good context, and then we can roll from there.
Well, kia ora tātou katoa, and thank you, Te Rāwhitero, for welcoming me into your space. It's awesome to see you creating a safe space for whānau to learn more about technology, blockchain, and other cool ways that we can navigate the world in this space. Tēnā tātou, I te taha o tōku pāpā he uri tēnei no Ngāti Manawa ki te Rarawa, ngā puhi Ngāti Kahu. Tōku māma he uri no Ngāti Mahanga, no Ngai Tamanuhiri me Ngāti Kahanganu. I tipu ake au ki raro I te maru o Ngāti Kauwhata, Ngāti Piki Ahu Waiwai, kei te whanganui ātara e noho ana I tēnei wā, mauri ora kia tātou. So thank you everybody. If I think about technology and how I even got involved, my honest answer to you is I am a professional hautatu. So I'm really interested and curious around emerging trends and blockchain connection. Around 5 years ago, is I'm a part of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. And in that space, we have some of the amazing leaders globally who are involved in crafting blockchain, crafting currencies, leading out some massive spaces. And when I heard about it, my ears pricked up because I was like, what is this thing? Because the most important part of it was the introduction to Bitcoin. But the main thing I thought about is if we don't learn about this technology, then we may be left behind. So I'm a non-technical person trying to navigate this space. At the time, I knew very little about blockchain. And so really, as a hautatu, as a curious person, I just started to ask a lot of questions. So that then led me to an amazing chance meeting with another fellow. His name is Macdonald. He's Ngai Tahu, but he's also the CEO of a company called, he's an amazing individual. Anyway, him and I talked at length about our dislike of the banks and the fact that many Maori would never get the opportunity to be involved as the owners of the financial system. And so he just launched Centrality, perhaps a week into us meeting, his company had raised just over $110 million. And he agreed on the spot when we were jamming that he'd love to help. He said, look, Kay, I really would like to create the opportunity for you to develop your idea, which at the time was a Indigenous cryptocurrency. Let's see what we can do. So we just had a handshake and that's how it all started. And from there, we were then invited into his office in the middle of again, we're a bunch of loud Māoris. I had myself and a whole bunch of rangatahi come and join the space, and together we were trying to unpick and understand how does this technology work. How do we make sure that it doesn't abuse who we are, our tikanga? How do we also stay connected and involved so that we could actually be building our own technology platforms? And that's how it started.
Yeah. So you started in with a cryptocurrency kind of lens, eh? of all the different ways that we can come into this Web3 space, that was your in. And so how did it go? How did things develop?
Well, when we started out, we were trying to learn this. It's a new language.
Yeah.
It's a whole other world. And so we were trying to tap at the edges.
Yeah.
And I think the original proposition with Indigicoin was to try and create a coin that wasn't using a lot of energy, because, of course, for us, it's all about papatuanuku and sustainability. So we had to try and figure out that problem. We had to find what they call a use case, which is just a flash way of saying, how will this thing be used in real life? And the other part of the kōrero was developing a coin that, in my view, initially, it was around how could it rise in value based on the good that you did, versus how much miners were in the exchange of the coin in the technical world. So that was a very broad concept. And then we went and did a big deep dive into other cryptos that were being built at that time. This was 3-4 years ago, so the technology was nowhere near what it was today. There was
Even
a lot of
adoption there wasn't as much adoption back then, eh?
And it was a lot slower. And that was always going to be the biggest hurdle that we faced, was the amount of processing time, versus if you just use your EFTPOS card, things can be done in 2 seconds versus a 2-hour transaction. So that was a big issue that we were facing.
Yeah, massive. So you guys kicked off Indigicoin. Did you guys end up building it? Because I know, you would have started the process with all of that whakaaro about what is the use case scenario, how are we going to measure the amount of good that you do in the world? That thing of hiko, or the amount of energy, that's one of the biggest kind of arguments that people have against blockchain, against Bitcoin and stuff like that. Oh, it uses heaps of energy. But so how did you guys kind of explore those different aspects?
I think, in truth, we went off in lots of different directions, and we were trying to follow our tail in a lot of it. There weren't many at the time, any Indigenous-led cryptocurrencies built. So there were some concepts. There was the Aloha coin in Hawaii. That when you look at it, it looked Indigenous, but if you dug underneath it a bit more, you'd recognize that actually the investors were Japanese. And then you look a little bit deeper and you realize that actually there were a lot of Americans involved in it. And really, there was a lot of hype. And there is still a lot of hype around blockchain, NFTs. So we were kind of in this hype space. And we actually got picked up by both Centrality and another a crypto company that were really keen to wrap around us. And for whatever reason, it didn't stick. And I think, 1, it was about our readiness. I think 2, it was the market readiness. And I think
Timing.
Yeah, about timing. So I went away. I traveled over to China and ran a marathon. And then whilst on the Great Wall of China, I had a bit of a thought, which was, actually, I'm going to go back and I'm going to make this thing happen. So I got a phone call literally as soon as I landed from a
back in Aotearoa.
Yep, back in Aotearoa. And I got a call from a bro called Andy Higgs, and he's the operations manager for Central. And he said, "Hey, Kay, we've got a hackathon. We'd really like to invite you and your team to come back. The prize up for grabs was $100,000. And so I hung up the phone and I said,
prize.
I'm going to win. I'm going to win that hackathon and I'm going to smash it. So we walked into the hackathon that Saturday morning. Some of our rangatahi had come to join that kōrero, and our conversation was, again, revolving around some of the critical issues that were facing Māori. People weren't really jamming with the Indigicoin idea. I still thought it was really awesome. But again, when you kind of put an idea out there, you've got to roll with the crew.
And the market decides, to a degree, you can make something awesome but if nobody wants to pick it up or wants to use it, then it's not its time, eh?
No, and so I had to be open and flexible. And Ben Tairea, who was approached to join our team, he was a little bit like, "Oh, nah, I'm not really interested in crypto or banks." So we started to continue the kōrero, and then the idea landed around building a response to Māori land. And whenua Māori is a critical issue that we all face. And so could blockchain be used to help us solve some of those critical issues? And then we started to jam a bit more. And then we actually landed on it. And it was one of those aha moments where the sky literally opened and it was like, yeah, because what we landed on was whakapapa. And for me, that was the missing element across it all, because if you think about blockchain is a whole bunch of connected nodes all over the world globally. It's all about decentralizing, which means that no longer is there one uber power. There's lots of different nodes attached all over the place. And it's the same with genealogy. And genealogy is not only the connection that connects us culturally as Māori, it connects all of humanity. And so when that moment hit, we realized, boom, that's what we're going to work on. We're going to build a system, a decentralized system that will help us firstly develop an archive to support whānau to protect their knowledge, but also for us to be able to store our whakapapa. And because I'm a third
safely,
generation, safely. And so we won. We won that competition.
Congratulations to you and the team.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And three of us, myself, Ben Tairea, and Sam Core, we basically rolled into Centrality. I went through a 3-month intensive incubation program, and during that time, we used our funding to go out and connect with iwi, connect with whānau, connect with Māori trusts to understand what their problems they were facing. A lot of it revolved around tribal registers and the issues that they have to face. And we also interviewed a lot of whānau that their elders were dying or they had no access to whakapapa information. And then based on that, we built Āhau.
Yeah. And like when we think about whakapapa, quite often our kaumātua and kuia, they've either got it in their heads or they've got it in a book somewhere. And like the risk that we face is that, kia hinga atu etahi o rātou, they'll take our whakapapa, histories with them. Or sometimes, what happens if there's a fire and the house burns with that whakapapa book in it, then there's that thousands of years of whakapapa all lost. And I guess that's one of the things with blockchain, is that even if one computer dies, all the other computers are holding on to that same bit of information. But I guess the worry that our whānau would have about, putting our information up there on the blockchain is that, well, how do we keep it secure? What happens if, Billy Bob down the road wants to get our whakapapa and he doesn't whakapapa to the same tupuna we do? I know you guys looked into those sorts of things. So, like with those sorts of things about security, about protecting the mana of our whakapapa, even about cross-referencing, because, someone might taki a whakapapa a little bit different to someone else, and which one's right, which one's wrong. Are they right and wrong? Are they just different? Oh, yeah, koe rā tō whakapapa, anei tāku. How did you guys because you would have come across those in the interviews, yeah?
Oh, we've come across all of it. And I think the first one, of course, is people's reticence or reluctance to put their taonga into a technical space. And if I reflect on the likes of Pāhenare Tate from Motuti, there was a big no-no of ever putting whakapapa on Facebook or anywhere where whānau as the keepers of that knowledge weren't there to keep it safe. So that was a real life situation we had to contend with. We also had to really work with kuia kaumātua who were concerned. And so we had to work through that. I think the other part, if you think about it from a development perspective, because again, here's an idea. We're now funded to develop the idea, but then we also had to develop a kaupapa Māori safe approach to designing the software platform. And one of those considerations, if we think about the sacred nature of carving or the sacred nature of some of the work, but because whakapapa is such a tapu meta.
He tapu.
He mea tapu. The other consideration was, from the programmer and developer side, was, do we fast when we code? Do we need to make sure that Kaye is nowhere near us when we're actually designing the code for the software?
Because basically you're creating the pātaka to protect the kai, or you're creating the whare tupuna to hold that kōrero away. That's what you're doing when you're coding.
Yeah, so we had to consider that in the design. And then also we got challenged as well. And I remember a dear friend of mine, he said to me, Kaye-Maree, what does putting something into a technical pātaka or receptacle, does it change the mode of the contents? And I was like, ooh, that's a really good question. But it would be the same if you were to email a document, like, does it change the mode?
Yeah.
And the other one was another approach for protecting information is what they call sharding, which is where you might have a full document and then digitally it's kind of ripped up into a million pieces and then it's spread across lots of different separated nodes. And so in that particular instance, does that affect the mode of all of those tupuna that have been gathered together? And so we had to think about all those elements and dimensions. And so we had to just keep designing, getting feedback, getting input. But I think the other really important piece was, it was very important to me that, I had to be able to stand by this platform 100%. So the first group of people that we tested it on was my own direct whānau. Yeah. I had asked for support from my marae, and we also then established a training and worked with Moria Marae, which is our other marae out of Te Hikatu, to help us actually work on bringing this kaupapa to life and actually set these systems up with our old people. And so, we've been able to work through a lot of those challenges. And then you've also got the practical things, this is also an archive. So the whole practice of archiving, the whole tagging and cross-referencing and ensuring that it actually makes sense at a technical level, like we had to also design that into the software system as well.
Man, it's so much depth there and so many layers. And like with any of this technology, it's the functional aspects of it, the logical functional aspects, and then there's the ethical, and then there's the legal, law versus LORE law. Like, how do we protect our taonga? Because, ha kei tuatu I te whakapapa. And so it is that balance of, because I know some kaumātua kuia, my kuia, she wrote down whakapapa and held it in, Word documents. And those I now have access to, and I've backed them up because I back everything up 3 times at te whānau, 3 separate times. But like, that's backed up, and I know, okay, if we need to reach to that, it's there and it's safe. But I think it was Charles Royal. He put up a post where people were hitting him up for whakapapa and just basically bowling up and saying, "Hey, Kaye-Maree, can you give me the whakapapa back to Io?" Just rolling up on Facebook and just expecting him to just give it. This taonga that he's spent his lifetime learning, he's spent his lifetime cross-referencing and, connecting to different people and, listening to your story. Oh yeah, matching it up with my story, those sorts of things. I think a lot of it comes down to how. And that's the same as just going up to your kaumātua. You don't just walk up to your kaumātua and go, "Oh, hey, can you just give me the whakapapa back to Tāne, please?" That's not actually how it works. And so how do we build those tikanga, if we're holding it in this repository of knowledge, how do we build that tikanga so that people, when they approach it, they're approaching it in a tika way as well? So, man, so many considerations. Did you guys have any big wero people saying, no, just don't do it?
I think prior to COVID, yes, because there was still a real fear about technology. But I think that once we hit COVID and people became a lot more comfortable with technology,
Zooming, things like this.
Yeah, I had somebody literally laugh me out of the room to say, over my dead body, would I ever, put something into a computer? But I think post-COVID, they were like, I might need to think about that and reconsider it, because people were passing away and we weren't able to engage the way that we were used to as whānau, as Māori. And then also people's hunger for this knowledge and expertise started to really elevate and amplify. So perhaps technology could be a useful tool. I think the other consideration around safety, security, approach, which is obligation. And so that was another big consideration, is that yes, you can get this digital record, but those names mean nothing to you, and they have no meaning or relevance to you if you don't do the work that is incumbent upon you, the obligation to also contribute back to your whānau and hapū, and to also understand the names that you have access to, and also walk the lands in the maunga and put your hands in the water. So those were part and parcel of the conversations that we had to have, that it's not enough just to have a record. It also comes with responsibility. And that's something I don't think a technical platform can tell you or teach you. That requires the time for you to engage. But one of there have been two real happy moments that I've experienced. One of those has been when during COVID, we had an interview with an individual who was very unwell and has recently passed, but essentially he wanted to see his knowledge live on.
Yeah.
And then we also had a kaumātua, one of our papa, who's got like rooms full of shoeboxes and boxes full of information, and he's just been hard out on his computer for ages,
Typing it all in.
Yeah, and like just having a process around how can he digitize everything that was here, everything in his room, so that his tamariki, mokopuna, and all the other hapū members were able to access the information digitally, but in a safe way. And I think what sets Āhau apart from other systems, and this comes back to your first question, Te Rawhitiroa, around how do you cross-reference? Ultimately, the record that you create is yours, and everybody has their own version of the truth. And this is where whakapapa doesn't lie, people do. And they also omit things and they leave things out. So whatever you develop in your own genealogy record is yours, and whom you share that record with is up to you. And for us, we'll never see that record. The system is completely open source, and which open source basically means that other developers can come in and they can add to the code and they can make it better. So that's wonderful. So that in itself is not a commercial model, but also it's downloaded to your own system. So you have full control over what you put into it and where it goes. It's got nothing to do with us.
So Āhau, so like, you know, people are a bit more familiar these days with like Facebook or Google. They are collecting all of our data all of the time, and then they are monetizing that, like selling that information to advertisers and things like that. With Āhau, nāhau, nāhau ke wene kōrero, they're your kōrero, and so rather than Āhau, the app actually holding everything and owning everything, you're saying that because it's decentralized, because it's blockchain, we, like, if I put in my whakapapa, I own that and I control who has access to that. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100%. It belongs to you 100%, which I think is really amazing. And it's something that sets us apart from the other companies like Ancestry.com or
any of them.
Because you basically have to subscribe to their service. And if you don't pay your subscription fee, you lose access
You can't access your own whakapapa. Yeah.
And we felt that was a really unethical practice. And again, you can understand why people are worried. But then, and the other part of our journey in developing the platform is that you had to look at the players. So genealogy is it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
And if you think about who are the largest curators of genealogy information, it's the Mormon faith or the Church of Latter-day Saints. They've been doing it for a very, very, very long time. So
worldwide.
So we went to go and learn with them, because why not? You know, they have been in this space gathering genealogy, and I wanted to understand how they've created and cultivated. Because if you think about genealogy in a global form, the way that Japanese communities, Chinese communities, African communities gather and store their genealogy is very, very unique and different. And then you go global. So they've been doing that for a long time. But then if you look at some of the systems that they've got online, one, it's great because you can just literally, tap into Google and do a search and it's there. But the challenge with it is people can modify that genealogy as well. They can add bits, they can delete bits, they can take stuff away. And I think that's a real risk for individuals that are trying to protect their whakapapa and protect their cultural intellectual property rights as well.
Yeah, like someone coming in, no, that's the wrong whakapapa, da 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 da. And that happens in real life, or they might be a little bit more tactical with how they correct the whakapapa. And if someone like people do make mistakes, and sometimes because say my uncle said it was this, so I'm going to say it's this, even if he might have had a forgetful moment that day, then I'm going to tell my kids and haere ake nei, and we might perpetuate that forgetful moment of that uncle at that particular time. So there's a big balance, because I think like harau te tangata whakapapa. I don't have the mind for that, but I've got mates who do, and it just I marvel at them. Like it seriously impresses me, that ability to tātai and connect people. That was one thing that Koro Wiremu Tāwhai from Te Whānau Apanui, we were really lucky to spend some time with him, and he said, there's two main ways we can use whakapapa. One is to whakaiti someone else by saying, like my whakapapa line's above yours, that kind of showing off, like I'm from here. But he said the one that he likes is a way to connect, and so he, within the Wānanga that we were in, first he started with his whānau, and he had a niece or something in the room, and then he went up to the hapū, and then he connected with someone else that was in the hapū. Then he went to Mātātua Waka, and he connected to us in Te Tautokero, and and the Apanui, and then he went up, and by the end of it, he had connected to everyone in the room. And so, like that magic and that power of whakapapa, if we have a way to protect and hold it ake nei, and that's what they're saying about blockchain, unless there's a big power surge or something that kills everything in the whole world, that stuff's there. I guess the ability for our uri, 10, 20, 40, 100 years down the track to be able to still access that, the possibilities are massive. I guess the big thing for us is that safety of it, eh? How do we keep it safe?
Yeah, for sure. I think that comes down to your own practice, and we can do our part by creating the software, but you as the individual will need to protect your device, because it really comes down to your device.
Yeah.
And if you lose your device or something happens to your device, then that's on you.
Yeah.
There are two other cool things that I really love about the system, and also just to confirm, what we built it on was a type of blockchain, or really a type of decentralized technology, and we used Scuttlebutt, which enables peer-to-peer communication, and that basically means the sharing of information where you don't need Wi-Fi or connectivity to be able to share. You will need to be in Wi-Fi for it to load up, but I could send you a message without any internet, so we could be in the middle of
Pangaru
or Waima, and I can share you a message, my whakapapa record to you, and you won't get it until you're in Wi-Fi, but the fact is that I could share it, and I think that's awesome, because we recognise the barriers when whānau don't have access to stable internet. So that was an issue that Scuttlebutt
cool, and
us.
You built that into it.
Yeah, I think the other cool thing about it was the secondary piece, which is called building a pātaka. And so I can download the app onto my phone or onto my device. I can put all my information into it. I can have an archive, so I can load up, photos and videos into my archive system, which is on my laptop. But I also want to share a copy of what I've developed for my whānau. So working with Amarai, Moria, for example, we wanted to test the development of a pātaka, which is that basically it's a digital cloud system. So I want to be able to deposit a copy of my record at a place of my choosing, so obviously the marae. So when I'm in the same vicinity, basically I can upload a document and it'll also upload into the pātaka. But the cool thing about it is that none of the committee members, no whānau can read that document unless I give them the key. So it's fully encrypted, which I think is really, really awesome. So And I think really beautiful to see my relations, one of my kuia and my other whanaunga, and they were just goofing off because they were able to like enter in their information onto their computers, and they were like, oh my God, I can see it on my computer too, and how cool that was. Now I felt really happy in my heart. To see that exchange of information happening. And then if you can imagine, right, so we're heading back to our marae and we're talking about this idea, and then we're having to implement the idea. But of course, our whānau, like no one wants to know how the internet works. Like you don't need to know how information is transferred and shared. But
it just works, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just works. Who cares? But what I really love and appreciate about Ben was that he actually showed whānau, this is how decentralized technology works. This is what it looks like. And this is what's happening when you're loading up information and how it gets from my device over there. And I think that was really cool because very rarely is technology designed with our people at the core of it. And I also think very rarely is technology designed where it's an iterative, reciprocal process. So whilst they're learning, we're learning, and anything that gets picked up, our development team can actually ensure that it's responsive to whānau needs.
Yeah, that's magic. And so have you guys had much pickup so far? Because I know it's constantly developing, and, how has that been? How have people taken it on?
I guess in a way we've been quite careful about our rollout. So we're live, so you can come and visit our website, www.āhau.io. You can make a request and then we can send you the download. So I think at the moment we've got about between 35 and 40 active users, and we wanted to just keep it relatively small so that we could iron out any bugs or just get that chain of feedback and input from whānau as well. And of course, our funding runway only took us so far. And so what we did on top of that is that we started to venture out into other areas. So it was very important that Āhau was free forever. But we are looking at, well, how do you also make the company sustainable? So that's the next layer of consideration, is the commercial realities and the commercial requirements to keep a platform like this alive. So then 3 years ago, I entered into another accelerator program and I looked at digital identity. Now, again, back then, we were still quite ahead of even where the Crown and government was sitting in regards to digital identity. And like what is
Real
that?
Me and stuff?
Yeah, so Real Me, being able to log into one system once, and then it could enter you into all sorts of other government platforms. And so in a way, we were looking at the idea of a Māori Real Me. And on top of that, though, a way to be able to protect our data. So if you've got
the government wasn't in charge of it or holding it, or Google wasn't.
Yeah, and I think also that we had a key to our information that was based on us rather than a definition that was imposed upon us by the state. So here we were looking at, well, what would that look like? And essentially there are two forms of identity that are known globally, a passport and a birth certificate. The argument or the hypothesis that I put forward was, what would it look like if I was able to use a digital identity to be able to open up a mainstream bank account or be able to apply at a university, or even for many of our whānau that can't get a passport or a birth certificate for whatever reason.
Even just the cost of
that they could use their digital wallet and they would be able to use that to be able to open up or access those services. So it was about accessibility. And it was also about the opportunity. But at that time, 3 years ago, the framework or the thinking at a government level wasn't even there. So I was able to plant some seeds. We were able to influence the Crown to think quite carefully about enabling a different form, a complementary, because you have to say complementary ID that was available. So it was still legally recognised, but it also had te tiriti at its core because, why can't we? Why is it that the state are the only bodies that are responsible for issuing identity?
Exactly.
So we've kind of gone down that track to explore that, and I think that's going to be shaping up this year.
Is that connected with Āhau? Like, would that be part of that system, or is that? Yep.
That's the plan, so that you can have another option in your Āhau system, which would be your digital ID. So that was thought. And then how does that plug into banking? So I didn't get Indigicoin at the beginning, but I've kind of gone on this twisty journey to bring us back to it, because
Cool.
in order for crypto to actually last and be trusted, it needs to be built on a very, very strong platform. But secondly, people needed to understand how to use it. So it is even like Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Like it
It's
does
still,
take a while.
yeah, we're still early adopters. Like in our last Wānanga with Pat McPhee, he was talking about, early adopters, which is us. And we're like kupe. We're going out. We're having to find it. We're getting a little bit hungry while we find out where the kai is. We're getting a little bit thirsty while we're finding out where the why is. We're figuring out how to buy Bitcoin, transfer Bitcoin, store Bitcoin, all of those sorts of things. We're making the mistakes and stuff like that, hopefully so that we can teach our whānau, the early majority that come in, so that they can know the system. So yeah, it's still early days, and with the blockchain and or like cryptocurrencies and with Āhau, or like all of these things,
Yeah,
it's
it's
still really
definitely
early.
new. And I think people weren't very used to it back then. I think that one of the positives that I've really appreciated about NFTs, even though I might not be a hundy all over the NFTs kaupapa, and there's a range of reasons, because the other consideration when it comes to new technology like this is you've got to think about the rails, right? So the rails.
Talk to us about rails.
So the rails is the system that you would use for blockchain or for decentralized technology. So if you think about who runs the rails, right, it's again not Maori, it's not Indigenous people. So even if you've got a mean as app idea and you've got a mean as NFT, you're not really the one that's making the money. The money is actually belonging to those
It's your
rails.
Ethereum gas.
The rail, yeah. So Ethereum and everything associated with Ethereum, they're the ones that are pocketing every single transaction, every single gas transaction that's rolling. So then you have to dig deeper to say, is it enough for us to be end users, just adding our thing on top of a railroad track? Or I want to be there at the ground floor and I want to be owning that railroad. So
yeah.
That's when we started to have these other conversations in partnership with the likes of Centrality and other railroad providers to say, we actually are wanting to own and have ownership stake in this because, again, of course, people want to have their fingers all over a mean as Indigenous product that's been well tested and well designed. So we are not at a loss for people that are lining up who want to join forces. But again, when you scratch below the surface and you look really closely around the railroad track owners, you've got to follow the money. So the money will always lead you to who actually controls the system. So
just a little digression, those are two questions that I ask when I'm looking at any NFT project or just any project in general. Like if I'm going to be partnering with someone, is like who's made it, like who's created it or whatever, and who benefits. And like following the money is a real clear way to go. Who actually benefits from what you're doing or from what the scope up is, and that's kind of those are things that I measure kaupapa against. If I'm going to go and support it by buying NFTs or by jumping on a blockchain rail or whatever, you kind of want to know. You don't want to just go, oh yeah, like the aloha thing. Oh yeah, this is our Hawaiian kazis, and then you actually go to see that actually no, our Hawaiian kazis don't get the gas fees. It doesn't actually have any cultural grounding, or it doesn't. I'm hypothetically speaking, I haven't even heard of it. Other than now. But those are the questions, and so you guys have dug in and gone, oh well, what about if there's one that if we dig into the rail, then we can see actually, hei wi take ngā me hakahaere ana I tēnei kaupapa, like we're the ones actually running it.
Yeah, but I mean, there's pros and cons of it. It's not cheap.
Of course.
It's not cheap to run the railroad. And so this comes back down to the commercial and legal, the law, LAW, which is how do you create mutually beneficial commercial agreements where it's a win-win. So if you're able to get in at ground level and have that conversation and be able to lock in regards to how do we equally split the fees that will be coming in, but also how do we make sure that there is no prohibitive costs that prevent Indigenous peoples from being able to access their knowledge and their information. And the great thing about the system that we've used, which is called Scuttlebutt, as the base railroad, it meant that the system was always going to be accessible to whānau no matter what. But I think that as we start to layer on other services and other opportunities, those will be commercial opportunities. But I think it's important to be open and transparent about that. And I also think, if you look at organizations like Facebook and Google who are using your data without your knowledge 24/7, and they make their money through advertising. So I'm like, hey, look, that's fine. And most people don't really care, to be honest, because that's the cost.
Just let me get my likes. Just let me get my likes.
Yeah, as long as they get this free service, they don't mind. And so if you were to create an intermediary that said, hey, you know what? Anytime you use my data, I want a notification. And anytime any money is exchanged between my information and a third-party corporate, I want a cut.
Yeah.
I want a cut. I want a digital cut every single time that data is changing hands. And often we are not part of that conversation. And that's the opportunity that I see, is that we want an intermediary. Any data that exchanges hands. And this is right across the board. This is government. These are schools. These are advertising agencies. There's plenty of money that's floating around that we as end users and the people that are being harvested from are never really part of that conversation. Now, if
we're the product, we're not. That's in Facebook and Google and stuff. We are the product. We're the ones that they're selling. Like our eyeballs, our interests. Te Rāwhiti search for a motorbike. Let's feed him motorbike advertising to try and get some sales for this motorbike shop. It's that kind of thing. Like, we are the product. We're not. We're not the landlord. We're the tenant.
Yeah, definitely. And so being involved in a range of different high-level conversations and real basic conversations as well, to say, well, what does it look like for us as Māori, as Indigenous peoples? And then the third dimension that I'm wanting to enter into is in banking. So I was really lucky to have been supported to enter into a program called the Atlantic Fellowship. And in that particular program, I just did a deep dive on Indigenous banking. I had a look at some of the rationale behind banks like the Ratana Bank, the Kingitanga Bank. What was some of our tupuna thinkings at that time? Like, why would they establish a bank? And primarily it was to keep the ability of trading and economic opportunity free-flowing, especially during the land wars, because it was the only primary way of getting money spun between whānau and hapū. But also the intention was to be able to control our own economy. And it's very difficult to control your own economy if you don't run the banks which print the money. So if I go deeper into that, then I think, well, why don't we own our own banking system? And people are freaked out about it. They're like, no, that's too big. That's too expensive. And I want to give a big shout out to Inez White and her people from Te Arawa who've actually created a Māori Indigenous-led credit union. It's not the first credit union. There have been other Māori-owned, Māori-run credit unions for some time, but it will be the very first that is specifically focusing in on supporting investment into Māori land. Now, if you think about all the documentation that is required by a borrower, you've got to gather up all your bank statements, pay statements. You've got to be able to prove that you're not a credit risk. And so you have to individually grab all that information together and store it. Well, what if you could use a hoe to gather up all your information and have it in one place? And
secure to you.
Yeah, and that's something
until you decide to share it. The other thing that's really massive in with the banks is the amount of control and bias and racism, those sorts of things. You can have a Māori and a Pākehā who earn exactly the same amount, who go in to buy the same house. Quite often, most of the time, the Pākehā person will get the loan and the Māori person will have to jump through 20 more hoops or whatever. And so that if we are the ones running the banks for our own people, that sort of thing, we can set our own criteria as to who gets lending and, how we can support it. And that can take away some of those biases and, even the systemic racism.
Oh, for sure. And I think to add to that, hence the reason why it comes back to whakapapa, is that you are less of a credit risk if your cousin is going to endorse you, right? Because you can already be guarantor for somebody. But if you're really trying to get, and this is just any capital, right? Any capital that you, basically people want to know that their money's safe, or they're going to get it back, and that if you do a run, I'm going to find you.
Yeah.
And so a couple of years ago, this amazing fintech festival in Singapore, and I was exposed
Fintech, just break that down for our whānau.
Financial technology expo,
Kapuho.
the largest in the world. And this is where all the banks, now Singapore are real smart. They're very smart because they are the clearinghouse of all cash across Asia. So what they do is they put on a big event. They invite the best companies in the world to come in and showcase their wares at a week to 2 week long conference. Now, it was amazing. And if you think about some of the issues that banks and digital banks still have to face, they have to face going through whether or not an individual is going to be a decent person that I'm going to lend money to. And they also want to know that you're actually going to put in some effort to do financial education. And that, again, I just want to give a shout out to Inez and her team, because they are baking in financial education into the loan program, which means that you must do your own process of proving that you are going to be a worthwhile individual to invest in. Now, if you could do that all technically, that's awesome. And so, as I said earlier, even though Indigicoin didn't launch like I hoped, my hope is that we'll get to a place within the next 2 to 3 years where we've actually got a trading system which will enable Indigenous to Indigenous trade, Maori to Maori, quick exchange. And I mean, just on what I was exposed to in Singapore, one of the coolest systems that I saw is a digital coin called M-Pesa. M-Pesa is a coin, a digital coin that enables whānau to be able to transfer money quickly between each other. And it was a big issue for them because, of course, they don't have access to banks. And so they would have to either hustle a bus driver to go, can you pick up this money for me, which is like 1,000 miles away, pick up that money and then bring it back to me. And I'll pay you $100 to do that for me. So that was one way that they were getting cash into their community.
And then you have to trust that the bus driver is going to get it and actually bring it all back and all of those sorts of things, eh?
And so M-Pesa was created to help make it easier for communities to digitally exchange money. Awesome. But again, who runs the railroads? It ain't owned by the African communities. It's run by Vodafone. And so Vodafone are the ones that are making the money every single time a transaction is made. So, you know, you want to be able to upset that and say, look, why can't we run the railroad? Why can't we be collecting the tax every single time? But then that money goes into our own communities, into our own pockets. And it's not the first time that I've had this conversation, but I think that we could, and it's not the first time that banks have been discussed by Māori communities either. What I think, where I believe we're at the moment, is that we are much more closer to activating and enabling these because the cost to enter is much lower.
It's coming down, eh? Yeah. And that's one of the things that you'll notice, like, say, solar power. When solar power first came out, it was really, really expensive and actually quite inefficient. Like, you needed 100 solar panels to be able to power your jug or something like that. But, you know, as the efficiency kind of the solar panels raised up, and then the economics, you know, the price of them came down, it became more of a thing that, you know, would be worthwhile doing now. And kind of those early adopters took it on at that stage. But yeah, no, I can definitely see it. There will be a time when Indigicoin, you know, we will be able to use it. I'd definitely be keen. But, you know, as also a way of supporting people in our community, if we all put in into this Indigicoin, and if we're putting into this bank, people are verified, and then we can, it's kind of like those DAOs as well, eh? You know, like they can choose where the putea goes, and they could say, oh, yep, anyone that was wanting a kaupapa reo Māori, we will lend to those, or we will even, you know, some of those taxes and stuff, they could be grants. You know, we'll put our grants into those sorts of things, and that can be decided decentralized by the hapū, by the people that are actually invested in it. So, man, the potential is really there. I guess it's just the time, eh? Is it the time yet? And how many of the blocks do we have to get, you know, sorted? You need to get the identity document sorted, you know, the verification, kind of connecting your dots with other people's dots. So, you know, like I could say I'm from Tūhoe, but everyone from Tūhoe would be like, no, you're not. you know, I'd have to give verification. So, but if I say I'm from Ngāti Kahuki Whangaroa and they go, oh yeah, I know your kuia, she's from this marae, yeah, I can verify you. That sort of thing. So yeah, like what other bits do you have to get in place in order, you know, for this to really kick off, you reckon?
I think it'll be the verification process. So,
Yep.
you know, if you think about how do you verify whakapapa today, it's either in a one-to-one type relationship between myself and you know, my
And the
whānau who
mātanga.
shared that information. So that's stock standard, sits on its own. If I want to register with my iwi, I have to complete a form, whether or not it's a physical one or a digital one, and I have to input 3 generations of my genealogy. Then I have to get a kaumātua to verify who I am, and then I've got to send that document off, and fingers crossed somebody inside that tribe can go, oh yeah, I know the Dunns, I know her grandfather, yep, she's a Dunn, tick, right? So
Yeah.
but
Still
that's
needs a
all kind of,
verification, eh? Like it still
yeah,
requires that person to go, oh, yep, here it
yeah,
is.
but there will come a time when those individuals that verify whakapapa aren't with us
Won't
anymore.
be out, yeah.
There will come a time when there will be people that won't be able to recognize, because we're such a broad diaspora all over the world, people coming back like 4 or 5 generations later, coming back to claim their whakapapa. You know, how is it going to be managed into the future? And I've had some mean conversations with organisations that have said, look, we've had to use DNA verification. We've had some really awkward use cases where whānau have, you know, been the result of artificial insemination, but, you know, or, you know, the
Wow,
father
and then the DNA doesn't
supposedly
work.
was, you know, of a
Yeah,
tribe. And so I, as that child product, I don't know them, but I say I'm a Maori, then I need to have that verified. So it's going to get trickier and trickier every decade that goes by. So I do feel that it's very important that tribes think quite carefully around how they will manage that process. So step 1 is the verification. So I've got a pretty good sense around how I want to test that, and I've got a couple of amazing iwi that have agreed to say, okay, Kay, let's test the thing.
We'll give it a go.
Okay,
We'll give it a
okay.
go.
So that's one.
Yep.
And then the second one is testing it. It also has to be verified by the Crown. And, you know, we could also create our own independent system, and people already have. There are already people that are issuing their own driver's license and birth certificates. But again, if you were to use that, in, you know, you're pulled up and you're asked, show me your driver's license, and people have done that, and they're like, sorry, we don't recognize that. Or I can't bowl up to a bank and kind of put my card up and say, here's my ID. They're going to say, sorry, there are only 2 forms of ID that are acceptable, a passport and a birth certificate. Sorry, you can't use that. So we have to test that to see if somebody will accept what we put forward. And then it's also around the design of the rail. So one great thing about being in Singapore was, you know, we got support at that time from an organisation that creates digital banks. And they just said, look, when you're ready to come back and build this thing, do so.
Yeah.
But this was pre-COVID. And I also think that we need to get a level of readiness for our communities in order to be able to adopt technology, because everything's a great idea until you actually
but you actually got to be able to understand it for one, and I guess that's what I heard that sounded cool when you guys were doing Āhau, when you fellas were taking it around, actually kind of explaining the technology, how it worked, and that's what helps people adopt it. You know, like if I look at any of the NFT projects, you know, Eager Beavers for one, or Grams, all of our bros, when they're trying to bring people into that space using the technology, you got to do how-to videos. You got to coach people through, oh, you know, it didn't work this way. My MetaMask wasn't connecting. Okay, well, here's how you do it. So you're going to have to do that with this technology as well. And same with the verifying. Man, Real Me was a hard process. It wasn't easy. And I know, you know, most people wouldn't be able to get a Real Me, or wouldn't have been able to at the time that I did it, because I was just like, man, this took me ages. Maybe it's a little bit easier now, but I think those are all some of the barriers that you'd have to kind of think about and build in the back end to be able to educate our whānau, like in order to be able to use this one.
Definitely. And I think that part of being a hautatu when I started was that this has all been built on a whole stack of experiments. So this wasn't just a random idea. The random idea actually was built on a whole stack of real life experiments. So I mihi to Māori Women's Development Inc. because whilst in that space, they allowed me the opportunity to test a lot of ideas around creating opportunities for whānau to trade, whether or not that was the development of the Hene Time Bank, which didn't get as far as I had hoped, but I also think that technology was a bit fiddly. But the opportunity for whānau to trade skills between each other, wahine to trade skills when we don't have cash, I thought was a really beautiful opportunity to test. So that was one. And then we were able to partner up with Pledge Me and create an Indigenous crowdfunding platform called Tākoha, which was a different approach to enable crowdfunding, because crowdfunding is also an alien concept to our communities generally. We have had quite a few successful Māori organisations go through that process and apply, and use crowdfunding, but it still was a bit weird. So kind of
Actually,
Tākoha.
online crowdfunding is a little bit weird, but we've been doing crowdfunding since forever, ever. If you think of a kohi that happens on a marae, we need to build a new wharekai. Okay, we'll do a big kohi. So, each whānau gives whatever they can. We've been doing crowdfunding forever, but it's these online platforms that's a little bit, that's a bit weird. That's a little bit different. So is Tākoha still working? I hadn't heard of it, and I'd love to, put people onto it.
We tested it, but it still needed a bit of love into it. So we were able to get it off the ground. We were able to put about 6 or 7 ventures through it. So it was awesome. So the platform worked, which is amazing. But it actually wasn't the platform, because that was really Pledge Me, and that was already established, and they'd already gone through the whole kind of due diligence
done all the
process.
Testing
Where the point of difference was the education and helping whānau become more familiar with using the system, and then going out into community and getting the community ready to say, this thing is going to be hitting Aotearoa soon, be ready. So it's just waiting to be brought back to life again. I think it's sitting with Potama, perhaps, but I need to just double check that. And so that's one. And then also, I've also had a real passion about the economy for a very long time. I think there are way too many barriers that are preventing our people from accessing capital, from being able to borrow so they can build on multiply owned land. The bank system doesn't always work in our favour. And even though there are quite a few amazing Māori individuals now at high levels within banks, it's taken a long time for us to even get to that place. But if we come back to it, we don't own those banks. We are just the customer. And I think that it's really important that we start to change our perspectives and our ideas to move from being a customer or an end user to being a creator and a developer and an owner of the system, so that it better serves us and our aspirations as a people.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, quite often our bottom lines are different. Our goals, our definitions of success are different from whatever the standard ones are sometimes. Like for us, for any old business or any old bank, the bottom line might be, okay, how much money can we make? But our bottom line, or our goal, our measure of success would be how many whānau can we help build their whare on their papakoinga, for example. And that's not profit-based, That's about helping other people achieve their goals and those sorts of things. So I think, getting into that position to be able to run it, own the tracks, I think that's, Is that a space, do you reckon, because it takes a little bit of capital to get into that, to be able to do that. Is that a space that you think our iwi might be able to start moving into, or you're seeing them moving in there? Like, I don't know, have you seen any of our iwi moving into that space?
I believe there are some. I'm yet to meet you, but
call us up, please.
But I think it'll come in time. I think, in all honesty, again, when you're investing tribal money, it comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of transparency. And so safe bets are usually the one. And so there aren't many who understand technology and its application and what it looks like. It's very high risk. And so you don't really want to be putting your people's money into spaces that you don't know about. But I'm seeing a growing appetite and a growing awareness commercially for technology opportunities. And I see a lot of work been happening in the VC space or the venture capital space, where there are really amazing Māori and more investment companies or organisations that want to help activate and invest in the tech space. But I think that will take a while. I think that'll take a while because with a farm, you can see a cow, you can share a sheep, I can see a tree. But when it comes to anything like blockchain, NFTs, telecommunications, I can't see that. I don't know how I'm going to build an argument around that. But the truth is that we actually use technology every single day. Whether or not if you're dealing with cows, there's usually some sort of technical component attached to nearly every single element of our work. But we just don't necessarily think about that as part of the investment opportunity. It's just an add-on. So I think that there's a real wonderful opportunity for our iwi to learn, and I think it's incumbent upon the tech sector, Māori and tech, to help teach and educate. And I'm kind of in that space as well. At the minute, we've got a partnership project with Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi, and I'm working with an amazing research taumata of tech professionals, and we're looking at mapping the Māori tech sector, the Māori tech space, so that we can see what is the potential, what are the case studies of people in tech, and how might we really help amplify and create more opportunities for whānau to enter into the tech sector, and how do we also invest in that opportunity as well.
So how far along are you guys in that research? Because that's a massive piece of work just to see even who's in the space, eh?
Yeah, we'll be kicking off a national survey within the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on Te Rāwhiti Pānui. He's going to send it out to everybody so that you can
Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
And I'm also hosting a show for Tech Week, which is on the 17th of May. And I'll be interviewing and having some really awesome conversations with Māori in the tech space to talk about tikanga and technology. Lee Tumutumu from Te Mataro is going to be talking about data sovereignty and data sovereignty for our kuia and kaumātua. And so I just want to also do a shout out to my friends that are doing amazing work across data sovereignty, coding, blockchain developments, NFTs. There's a lot of trailblazers that are out there doing amazing work, and we just don't know enough about what it is that they're doing, and make that more visible. And I love what you're doing here, Ehua, with Blockchain Navigators, because I think what you're doing is you're helping to break it down and demystify so that our whānau understand what this technology is and it's not scary. And I think also...
And to hear it from our own. Like that's the big thing for me is like when I was learning, I'm still learning, but when I started to learn about blockchain, about, cryptocurrency, about NFTs, I could only listen to Americans or Europeans or, like, those are the only people that we're talking about it. But, we're up to whatever episode we are now of all these amazing Maori and tangata o te moana nui a kiwa who are doing this stuff. Like, we are in this space. We are navigating this space and we are doing things in our way. And that's our, marketing speak, unique selling proposition. That's our X factor, is that we do things in a different way. We do things in a really connected way. We do things for a different bottom line. And that's what, excites me about these kaupapa that you're doing. When you guys came up with Āhau, it's not about, okay, how do we make heaps of money? Like, there's not your bottom line. It's, okay, how do we protect these taonga that are so special and so precious to us? And how do we make sure that our future generations can access and hold on to these? So I think, that survey that you guys do, like, I'm really excited to see who comes out of the woodwork, because as I've been going on this journey, I'm getting messages from people like, oh, do you know this person? Or someone will hit me up and be like, oh yeah, I'll be keen to have a yarn with you. So what do you do? Oh man, you're doing this, like even NFT developments just last week launched their NFT platform, Tangata Maori, like, I'm like, yeah, let's have a yarn. Let's dive into that and let's kind of showcase the different things that our people are doing in this space. And that's what excites me about, yarning with you, is that, a lot of people in Aotearoa, but also in the international Indigenous space as well. And, like, how are other iwi take engaging with the blockchain? Like, what have you seen?
Oh man, there are some mean developments. The likes of Michaela Jade from Indigital, she's been utilising her knowledge of the First Nations people and the way that they interact with the land. She was the first person where her and I just really gelled. I've got another company called Indigital, and I didn't know that there was another one in the world. She had it. I said straight to her, I said, "Hey sis, I've got a company called Indigital. Is that okay? I can be like your sister company in Aotearoa." She's like, "Yeah, that's fine." But together we were yarning because decentralized technology, or the decentralizing of knowledge and information and traditional knowledge, is not new to us. And when she was talking about how her communities, they would gather around a watering hole and they all had different language, and they went to certain spaces and they were able to share their secrets and their knowledge and their information around that watering hole, and then they would go back to their communities. But the reason why they would do that is because they had to protect where the next watering hole was going to be. So it was kind of like we were already working in a code and sharing information and decentralizing and getting it back out to our communities spread across the land. And so
that's exciting, eh?
She's doing amazing work in mapping and VR and development. I've met a couple of amazing companies in Canada and also in America who are creating their own Indigenous title, Indigenous digital identities, so that they can navigate the governments that they have to deal with. There's also a new digital identity company being set up in Australia. And in Canada, they've been really looking at the potential of banking, Indigenous banking, so they can help cultivate Indigenous to Indigenous trade. But that's only part of it. I think the other awesome thing is the NFT space. So even though there's a lot of hype around it, and if you think about crypto, a lot of our whānau have gotten involved in it. They have been burned by the system as well. But I think that a positive is that it's helped to normalize blockchain and normalize crypto and help break it down so that whānau could get involved.
And normalize being careful as well.
Yes, I think being careful is very, very important. But people get excited about the money and they get excited about the opportunity. But if you don't scratch the surface, and if you look at what Te Rāwhiti mentioned earlier, who owns it, who runs it, who benefits, if we don't ask ourselves those critical questions, there's no such thing as an easy win. There's no such thing as, or it might be an easy win, but somebody loses. Yeah. And to me, I think that's not a mana enhancing relationship, and definitely it's further amplified when it's done in a digital space.
Yeah, so it's choice to hear about all these different kaupapa happening around the world, and we might have to have a yarn with some of your mates, I reckon.
I think so. I mean, I think it would be awesome to have some of our other First Nations whānau talk about the technologies that they're involved in. But as I said, I think the opportunity for whānau, particularly those that have been watching tonight, is don't be scared. If I'm kind of channeling the bro, my kazi, Nikora Ngarapo, he talks about the importance of our tamariki being able to access or start their technology journeys young. Because if you think about what does it take to become a programmer, mathematical and science minds that are required, not always, but in regards to really starting to push boundaries, then how do we expose our tamariki to mathematics and thinking and designing? How do we create spaces for more Māori to populate, Māori and Pacifica, to be able to populate technology companies so that they don't feel out of place or that they don't belong there?
I'll be the token.
And I love the work that Ariki Creative have done by creating the book Wahiko, which is a book about the atua of electricity, because in my view, by normalizing tech and even creating our own deities in that space, we're owning it, because it means that, oh, you know what, we are part of it. Like, I might not be technical, but actually we had an atua, and even our tupuna were very wise in their knowledge and their understanding of our own wānanga space, that that there has been opened up for us to investigate and embrace technology. And Dan Walker actually was one of the catalysts that got me into tech, was because he said in his work that the 12th heaven was a space for opportunity, and that technology had already been foresawn in the past. And I was like, dang, bro, that's mean. And
Ko
so
whakaaro.
this whole, kind of cloud technology and the storing of our knowledge in a heaven, which could be a digital cloud, those things had already been discussed a long time ago. So now that knowledge had already been activated back then, dreamt up back then. Now it's our turn as the uri whakaheke to just step into that space and take it because it's ours.
Yeah.
We have to ask
And
permission.
and like I was talking with Papa Pau, Tēmara, a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the space. We were talking about our atua in this space, and he said, "Well, who said there's only 12 heavens? Yeah, maybe our tupuna could see that far, but like, what if there are more after that? And how do we explore those rangi after the 12th? What about the 13th? What about the 100th? And like, what happens there? These are all spaces that like blockchain navigating, like we're navigating these we're going to these new Hawaii, and when we travel there, like I love that Waihiko. When we're traveling there, we're taking our atua, or we are creating or finding whakapapa for new atua in this space. Had an awesome jam with Kirama Taiapa about atua in this space, and we were talking about his idea of hine te iwa iwa, because code, binary code, ones and zeros, raranga, whatu, tukutuku, tāniko, ones and zeros, things like that, and hine te iwa iwa, all the connections, all the different whenua that connect all these different computers to each other. So like, if we like these episodes, if we can see ourselves in the space, it's much more normal and it's much more natural for us to step in. And I think for a long time, especially for Maori, like if I think about conversations that I've had with my koro, he was saying, when we were coming out of school, if you're a Maori, you're either going to be a farmer if you're a boy, or a nurse if you're a girl. Like, that's what's expected, or that's what's going to happen for you. Like, that's the rangi that we can see from here. But like, now I think we've still got some of that hangover of, oh, dumb Māori, Māoris aren't good at maths, or Māori aren't good at technology, or things like that, where let's like completely kick those out of the out of the conversation. People like Nikora, people like you, people like a lot of the people that we've talked to, really innovative, really sharp. Inez, like you're talking about with finances, and she's not just doing it for her, she's doing it for her iwi, and helping her iwi. So I think normalizing the fact that we as Maori can step into the space, but not just step into the space and own it. Like, I do want to see Maori, maybe some of our iwi, maybe just some of our collectives, some of our mates, maybe some of us owning some of these railroads, owning some of this blockchain, so that we can kind of set the direction of how things go. Because if we have a different definition of success, then we will work in a different way. And I think we as Māori, like, that is something that we do. We work in a different way. We work in a collective way, which blockchain pretty much just sits perfectly sits perfectly with that. If you're to think about, like, these things that we've just talked about, and then if you jump forward like 20 years, what are some of the visions that you can see, for our people in this space?
I think there's a few. I think that it'd just be real normal, like, you're not just a farmer or a nurse, but you're also a programmer, developer, owner of an IT
Designer.
company. Like, that's super just normal as. So I think that's one awesome outcome. There's also a kaupapa called Whitiki, which has a broader vision of 100,000 Māori in the tech sector. And I think we have to remember that technology doesn't necessarily mean you're a coder or a developer. There are plenty of mahi where you've got to be a coordinator, a connector, you're on a phone, you're doing e-commerce, you're trading online. There's a whole stack of new and emerging jobs, remote workers. They're all using technology to be able to do the mahi that we can't do, that are different to how we did things back in the day. So that's the second opportunity. I think the third opportunity, which links back to the future of work, is that we won't have the same industries that we see today. They will be they will become obsolete. We will end up having to probably live side by side with robots, but there will be more technology will invade our lives, and that's either going to be a bad thing or a good thing if we can be at the helm of that decision making. And I think what I'm seeing in regards to thought leadership is, what does Indigenous values and practices look like when they're embedded inside the hardware, inside the design, inside the creation of future technologies? How and what will it look like for more of our young people to enter into the tech sector with confidence? And I think also I would love to see more tribal wealth being generated through their investment in Māori technology companies. I think we've got to be brave. You've got to know that the system, these companies, it's risky. It's part and parcel of it because you're experimenting. But we have to also increase our appetite for investing in ventures that might not get the outcome that we hope, but it will start to push the boundaries and enable more people to have a go. And I think that's also going to be really important over the next 20 years.
And our tupuna did it as well. You know, like it was a risky business getting on a waka and then cruising out to find another island. It was a big investment, you know, the time, the energy, the expertise to tārai waka, to learn the navigation, to get the crews that were ready to build up all the kai, you know, to be able to go on those journeys. So it's not as if it's something new to us. And, you know, like that, same as you, like that's something I would be happy for my iwi to be investing some, not everything, not go all in on a risky bet, but definitely looking at and starting to invest in these technologies, because I want us to be leading in the space, not following. Don't want us to be running behind the bus trying to catch it to jump on it. You know, I want us to be driving the bus. How do you think we can best prepare to be able to get into that position? So you're seeing that vision for us, and Indigicoin will be pumping by then.
Yes.
And I'm going to buy in early. But, you know, like how can we best prepare to get there?
I think that there's lots of ways. I think that once our research comes out, it's going to be really helpful for whānau to see what's out there.
Yeah.
And there's so
who's
many,
out there?
Yeah, there's so many beautiful individuals, thought and practice leaders and developers doing amazing work. And it's been quite lonely for a lot of them to do their mahi. I think there have been a lot of trailblazers. And so I think just pick an area that you're interested in, that you're curious about, and just do a deep dive. Like Auntie Google's awesome. You know, like you don't have to have all this knowledge in your mind. You can literally be taught anything just by watching YouTube and just teaching yourself how something operates and works. So that's one. I think that we also need to be having conversations as whānau with our tamariki around tech and what that might look like for them. And I also think that we need to be encouraging our kura, our whare kura, to include a technology component inside.
Absolutely.
Inside the kura, and also embrace STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. So those are kind of the key fundamentals, or the key traditional fundamentals of technology. But then I also think that we've got our layer of creativity, and then we've also got our Indigenous values. So I think that those dimensions are just as important as STEAM. So I think that we have to feel comfortable to know that we've got something to contribute in that space.
Because we really do. And, you know, I'm excited to see, you know, what our next generations come up with, because, you know, like we're learning in the space and we'll bumble along in there because it's all new to us. But man, a lot of our kids are already in the metaverse right now. You know, they're already spending how many hours a day playing their games and doing that. And if they're learning coding, I guess that's something, you know, for our educators, for our whānau who are leading our kura and whare kura and things like that. You know, when I was at school, I didn't like maths. I really didn't like maths. And it felt pointless to me, a lot of the exercises that we were doing, because they had no pānga, no relevance to life. Fast forward to when I leave school, I end up running budgets for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm using maths every day. But why didn't they teach me how to run an Excel spreadsheet and input formulas into that rather than doing random equations about, pi or whatever it was? I haven't used pi since I left school. But, like, why didn't they teach us how to use a Excel spreadsheet to do budgeting? Why didn't we learn how to budget for, okay, how much do I need to earn in order to pay this much rent, pay this much on clothes, this much on petrol, and this much on spending? Those sorts of skills. Now it's like, okay, let's make sure we're teaching our kids things like coding, or just even if they're not going to be a coder, even having a basic understanding of coding as another language that makes computers do this sort of thing, like even that sort of basic. And then if you have that interest, you can really dive into it, because if we don't, we're still educating for jobs in the last century, and then we'll be behind when it comes to the next century.
Yeah, and I think that learners of te reo Māori and children that are raised in te reo Māori environments are well prepared for a world of development, because like you said, zeros and ones, like the discipline that is required to create and cultivate and build something is well established in many tamariki Māori that are inside Māori medium education environments. So it's just an added language, and the discipline that goes with understanding how to use these tools. And then you've kind of got the whole steps of getting into the workforce. Like, that's not just technology, that's anything generally. So I feel that we just need to start to have the conversations and not be scared, have a go, and just have those conversations amongst us to go, hey, what does tech actually mean to me? And how do I actually engage with it? And what could I do differently? And how could I also invest in companies that that could also benefit my whānau in the long run? So those are some of the things that I think about.
And what do you reckon the challenges are, like, or the barriers? Like, why do you think, generally speaking, our people aren't jumping into these spaces? Because we're natural innovators, always have been. So what do you reckon is stopping our people?
I think it's scary, not knowing or understanding a thing. So that's pretty hard out. I don't think that the sector has always been open to us. They've been used to us being the labourers and doing the mahi. It's quite different when you walk into a space as a partner or as a designer or a developer. It's quite different, a different conversation. I think that it has been inherently racist, even though you'll say that mathematics and science, it's genderless, it's timeless, it's formless, that there is no
the
race.
People running it aren't.
The people that run it are. So I think there are a whole lot of systemic barriers that prevent us from entering into these spaces. And there is still evidence of streaming as well, where people are placed in roles or in learning subjects that takes them away from what they want to do. And, like gaming for a very long time was poo-pooed and thought of a real waste of time. And I'm not encouraging people to game 24/7, but it's $1 billion industry. So some of your kids that just spend all their time on computers, I don't make sense of it. I don't understand it. But the potential in that sector alone is massive. But then trying to encourage our young people to move from being gamers to actually creating games, well, that's a whole other conversation. But, there are some beautiful educators here in Aotearoa that have just kind of rolled their sleeves up, and they're just teaching kids how to step into these environments, take away the fear, encourage whānau to be involved, like the likes of RoboPa, who just won an amazing award.
Congratulations, RoboPa.
Where they were teaching kids how to build robots in te reo Māori. Like, that's awesome. And then seeing the joy in children being able to create their own robotic creations and battle it out with others.
Awesome.
There's te reo Māori animators, there is like te reo Māori gamers, but there are also Māori gamers, and there are, like, our influence globally is so underestimated, and our potentiality to enter into these new workforce opportunities is also massive. And so the likes of Barry Suter, who's been kind of hammering away at the industry and creating more commercial opportunities for Māori and tech. He is a trailblazer because he's creating the environment and the railroad for us to create our own businesses and our own industry and technology. So, there's heaps of stuff that I think is happening that we need to get involved in.
Yeah. And so, we've talked about the barriers, getting involved, connecting, but what are some things that can help our whānau overcome those barriers and actually gain that access? So part of it is us, in my mind anyway, is us normalizing the conversation, talking about this stuff and giving it a try and being seen to give it a try. And maybe I mucked that up, this time, but I'm going to try again, that sort of thing. So normalizing that. But what else do you reckon, or how else do you reckon we can help our whānau kind of overcome those challenges so that we can step into these roles?
I think Tech Week's going to be really awesome. So I'll make sure that link comes out. That's happening the 15th of May. Okay. And there'll be a whole stack of amazing presentations and kōrero. And I think just opening yourselves up to those conversations will also be really valuable because you'll be able to see Māori doing tech here in Aotearoa. And I think that will be inspirational. Yep. There are entry-level programs and supported wraparound opportunities for whānau to enter into coding. So Dev Academy is also real amazing. There's a beautiful whanaunga Dougal. He'll hold your hand and help you get into that program, and there are scholarships available there. And there's also Mission Ready HQ. They offer 40, maybe 50 scholarships for Māori to enter into the tech sector, Māori Pacifica, so that those jobs and those learning opportunities are available. And then there's a whole stack of code clubs that are happening all over Aotearoa in small little rural communities and large cities where kids can have a tutu and learn about technology in a different way. And then there are gaming studios. So I don't think that there is a lack of opportunity. I just think that whānau probably don't know about what the opportunities are and how they can get involved.
Cool. Oh, well, that's awesome. There's different ways for us to all get involved. What would be your final message to our whānau to wrap up our kōrero tonight? Because we've covered all sorts of things, and I really, really want to shout out to you and your team for creating Āhau, and I think that's a real trailblazer, in the way that we can engage with blockchain and we can use it to look after our taonga, and I really look forward to seeing or using it myself, but also seeing how it develops once you get the identity stuff, once we can pair it with a cryptocurrency, once we can see those other use cases. So we've talked about Āhau, we've talked about some of the different trends, excuse me, or the different ways that Indigenous people are kind of engaging in block space. We've looked at kind of the challenges, we've looked at how we can overcome it, and kind of look forward to where you see we could be. So what would be your kind of, last whakaaro that you want to share with the whānau, when we're talking about the space?
Well, I think we covered it in regards to just try, try, don't be afraid. And if you are afraid, without sounding cheesy, but try it anyway, it's okay. If you're going to make a mistake, that's all good. I think that we should be advocating strongly for more technology and development opportunities to be inside our communities. I think that's really important. And I think thirdly, suss out what your kids are doing. If you want to get a real good temperature test about what's hot, ask your kids, because your kids will know, and follow them, because if you can understand what they're up to and what they're excited about, that's really important to get some feedback from your children and the rangatahi, and our rangatahi as well. I think that with Āhau, that's been a labour of love, and we've kind of held on to it really quickly, really tightly. And it's not because I think when you are dealing with something as important and as precious as whakapapa, it's so important, and every single step we've had to think quite carefully about. So, big shout out to my co-founder, Ben, our development team, whom, I'm a big ideas person. I've always kind of visioning up things, and it's always beautiful to be able to see that thing come to life.
Yeah.
There's nothing more fulfilling what you imagine to be brought to life. And I also want to thank our early adopters, those that we just kind of presented an idea to say, hey, look, we've got this idea. Are you prepared to help us and be involved and help us design it? And all of those tribal early adopters and whānau early adopters that helped us right at the beginning when it was still just a whakaaro only, I've got to give big shout outs because they trusted, that we don't actually know what you're talking about, but it sounds cool. So, yeah, we'd like to be involved. And I think that's awesome that if you are in a position to hear an idea, don't diss the idea, just get behind it and just say, I believe in you, whatever it is, I'll help support you. And I think that's really important for whānau to allow ideas to emerge and get behind it and support it. Yes. And I think thirdly, my final message is thank you, bro. Like, thank you for creating this space to enable our whānau to learn about what's happening, understand, and I hope this has, along with all your other kai kōrero, it helps to pique people's curiosity and pique conversation to happen among whānau to go, what was it that they were talking about and how does that even relate to me? I think that's really cool.
Yeah, awesome. Well, tēnā koe, thank you for being part of this. And actually, one thing that I've noticed is it's been really cool seeing some of our kaumātua and kuia are actually the ones that have been checking out the space and getting their mokos into the space. So shout out to all our kaumātua and kuia who are watching these wānanga. But yeah, love the mahi that you've been doing tuahine, and I really feel like you are trailblazing for a lot of our people. And some of these ideas are a little bit before their time. Say, Indigicoin, it was a little bit before its time, but the groundwork is there so that when we are ready to kick it off, it's all there. It's ready to kick off. And I feel like you're getting, when I'm cooking, I like to get all my ingredients ready, and then I'll make the kai. Like I'll cut up all the meat, and then I'll cut up all the veggies, and then I'll put it together. So I feel like you're doing a lot of the work of cutting up all the meat and cutting up all the veggies and preparing the kumara or whatever, and when the time is right, you can put all those things together. And I think Āhau will be a really powerful space, and it'll be a distinctly Maori space and a distinctly Maori tool for holding on to our mātauranga, for sharing and disseminating it with our whānau. Making things accessible, and it also, it is a real risk to me losing our kaumātua and kuia and losing that whakapapa book and all the knowledge that's just gone. And so if there are ways that we can collect these kōrero, when we're talking about, little digression, when we're talking about technology and the reticence of some of our kaumātua to put our stuff in technology, I think about what I do as a photographer. I'm just a modern day kai whakairo. If you look at in a whare whakairo, all of those pou whakairo are pretty much family photos. That pou whakairo is a pou whakairo of your kaumātua, and it's got a bit of a story about him. All I'm doing now when I'm taking photos of people is I'm making kind of modern pou whakairo, because when we have them hanging in our house, they tell us the story of who this person is, what they were about when they were alive, that sort of thing. And, we as people have adopted that, in a really big way. And so I think this is also, like some of the kaumātua that I'm privileged to work with sometimes, like Papa Rereata, they've been in media for ages, using media and connecting people to mātauranga through the different media forms. So I think this is just the next step. And I think if there's people like you and the people that you're working with that are kind of trailblazing that space and kind of setting up the technology so we can do it with our values in mind, then I think we're going to be in a good place once the early majority come in. And, we'll be able to bring our people in. Like Kupe went back to Hawaii, and then the rest of us, rolled down afterwards. I think we'll be in a really good place. So just really want to me mihi ka tika ki a koe tuahine o mana o tapu o pukenga o pūmanawa me o whiako o mātukutuku kua mauria mai ki tēnei wānanga i tēnei pō, mihi kauana ki a koe. O tira ki a koutou, ki a tātou, ngā kai whakarongo, Pia o tēnei wānanga, mihi kau ana kia tātou katoa. Tēnā tātou.